So we saw about the two brand ambassadors for Absolute and for Grey Goose talking about their product. I'd like you to excuse me, see the ads for these products. You'll see the first one for Absolute. You'll see Kanye West come in and talk about it. Seems a little bit more in the bar. And for Grey Goose, you'll see a yacht, and you'll see a particular high-profile consumer, and the setting will be much more richer and probably communicating why the product is much more premium than what Absolute is. Here's two other things that help build a brand. The first thing that helps build a brand is distribution. So some of these retail stores, some of these places where the not vodka, for the in this case they talk about wine, is the retail outlet determines the premiumness of the product, which is why some particular products choose to be exclusive in the retail. iPad for a long time was so. That is, basically they were available in the Apple Store, and then went into some of the Best Buy and other kinds of stores, and now is available at Walmart. How is it going to affect the brand of iPad is something to be thought about. Probably Walmart draws more from iPad than iPad draws from Walmart. So in this couple of videos, you'll see about the first retail. I don't know if you know this, but the biggest seller of wine in the country, the retail outlet that sells the most wine, is Costco. And so you'll hear that. And so something for you to think about is, how is wine being sold? If wine is being sold, then how is vodka being sold? What's the biggest distribution outlet for vodka? And meaning, what's the distribution outlet for Absolute and for Grey Goose? And then after that, you'll see about Oprah and how whatever Oprah touches, her favorite things, just basically balloons. And so Oprah is a brand herself, and how does her brand affect the other brands that she touches? So what about Kanye West for Absolute? What about other kinds of products that these Grey Goose and Absolute are tied with? Celebrities, people, how do they rub off on the product? Meaning, if you go to Las Vegas and if you see a huge hoarding of Absolute, what does that mean? Does that mean that people are in the right spirit to look at that particular brand? Meaning, is it So if you, here are a few questions for you to think about. If you think about the small little mini case about the vodka wars, what components do you think compromises the brand equity for Absolute and for Grey Goose? What I would suggest is take a sheet of paper, stop the video right here, write down what you know about Absolute, what you think about Grey Goose, and just come up with words. So come up with 5 words. Top of mind, what comes when you think about Absolute. Top of mind, what comes when you think about Grey Goose. And see, why did you think about these? And see if there are common things. For example, is packaging a part of it? What else is I don't want to prime you on anything, but first do that, and then think about how should they build brand equity. So you've seen some bit about their advertising, some other distribution in other kinds of products that are similar. So how should they build the brand equity? So should they create new words? Should they build on these existing words? Are there negative words that they should take care of? Are there positive words that are slightly less positive than they should be? Let's say you indulge in a campaign that does that. After that, how do you measure it and say that you're on the right path or you made enough progress? And so that's how do you measure brand equity. And how can they sustain in a market which is seeing increasingly fragmented sellers coming in and selling? So Amazon Marketplace now allows for small little local suppliers to get in, and so does all the other retailers that are online. So how does Absolute and Grey Goose, how do they compete at that market? Okay. So let's see a small little video about how brand valuation is done.
Brands Report. We're joined now by the company's CEO, Jez Frampton. Mr. Frampton, welcome to Bloomberg News.
Good morning. Pleasure to be here.
Talk to us a little bit more about the metrics that are used when you're compiling your data.
What we're doing is effectively putting a value on the intangible asset, which is the brand. There's 3 things that we look at. Economic value add, first of all, and then there's 2 marketing factors, what we call the role of brand, how the brand actually affects your purchasing, and then the second is what we call brand strength, which looks at how well brand is positioned against its competitors.
Might I ask then, given the economic climate that we found ourselves in the last 2 years, talk to me about brand strength. Did any of the top contenders suffer even a little bit because of what we're going through economically?
Well, if you take a look at the table, whilst there's obviously some risers, there are also some fallers. Companies like Harley-Davidson, the most heavily hit on the table, of course, massively dependent upon discretionary spend. So without question, brands are there to help companies reduce risk. So as you would expect, and indeed we have seen, despite some quite massive movements in the economies and the markets in which many of these operate, actually the brands have remained relatively stable. The whole table in terms of value is up about 4% this year.
When you talk about economic value of a brand, how do you measure something like that? It seems like it would be somewhat difficult to pin down.
I mean, it's kind of one of those weird things that you ask the question, but when you think about it in terms of the way that you buy things, it all becomes very, very obvious. If you buy a particular watch brand or a particular car or shop in a particular store, what we're trying to do is find out to what degree that brand, your associations with that company in terms of its image, its service, the way that you're treated, what other people think of it. And we can put a number on that and say that's how important it was the Coke brand in terms of you choosing that drink compared to its competitors. We then combine that with their financial performance, and that gives you a sense on the value of the asset. It's very similar to the way that you would actually value a normal tangible asset.
And how is it that Coke has remained so enduring as a brand?
Do you know, it's bizarre, we have these conversations every year, because I think everyone dearly wants to see them drop off the top. But the thing is, these guys are fantastic at what they do. They are remarkably consistent. How many stories were them revolving around them in the World Cup? They reinvented the way that they marketed.
Where does that consistency come from? What is their formula for success? What are they doing that keeps them at the top of this list?
I think, it's a message for every company. They are obsessed by their customers. They understand very well what it is that drives people towards their products and what it is that enables them to connect themselves to events or whatever else it is that they may be involved in.
You say they're obsessed with their customers, but I would imagine that part and parcel of that is they listen to their customers as well.
Of course they do. And of course, in the age of social networking, understanding that is becoming more important than ever before.
Now, I was surprised when we were talking just now that Apple is not above Nokia, for example, especially since financially and sort of cachet-wise, you think of Nokia as hitting some roadblocks. But Apple is ascending relatively rapidly. So talk to us about those two and sort of how they stack up against each other.
It's very interesting. I mean, just as a straw poll, we asked people in our office this morning to put their hands up and say how many people have got a Nokia phone and how many people have got an Apple, and you can imagine what we saw. I think in terms of both of them, Nokia, of course, at one point dominated this entire sector, and Apple is growing, and growing at an alarming rate still. You have to remember that Nokia's dominance across Europe and in other parts of the world plays very well into their history. I think their big question is, can they ever regain the degree of understanding of their customers, their design and everything else? Apple certainly are leading the way.
In our last 30 seconds, some of the rising stars, quickly.
Well, we talked about Apple already. Google, now number 4 in the list. And of course their recent invention of real time kind of takes out any discussion about whether you can search any faster. Can you be faster than real time? BlackBerry, of course, as well, who really do own that kind of business level device. Interestingly, all 3 of those technology brands reflecting the way our lives are changing.
And you have Barclays, Zurich, Corona, Sprite, Jack Daniels,
Santander, Heineken, yeah. It's beers and banks, we said. It seems to be the new ones coming into. Maybe it's symptoms of the economic times.
You think? Yeah, pretty much. Mr. Frampton, thank you so much. Jez Frampton, Interbrand, joining us on set. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Okay, so we'll talk about brand valuation here, and this video talks about how do some of the best brands in the business, how do they get valued by Interbrand. So we started with a notion that basically brand equity is not one word, but it's composed of different. It's definitely one word. Sorry, is not one underlying number that most of you should look at, but consists of different components to it. So some of it is you probably start with brand salience, or how much is your brand visible. Then you get to how does it perform for what the consumer's expectations are, what kinds of imagery does it convey, and what kinds of judgments and feelings does it invoke in the consumer. So for example, is your brand like a Harley Davidson? Is it like an Apple that basically motivates people to stand in line for 2-5 days? And finally, how does it resonate? In the sense that basically, are you using your brand to communicate about who you are? So if you carry an apple with you and you walk out, meaning are you trying to communicate something about yourself to other people? Um, so if you look at a different take on it in terms of market research techniques, you could measure and say find out how deep and broad is brand awareness. What kinds of differences does it have when you compare it across different other products? What kinds of rational emotional scales, if you were to ask, does it point up or down on? And what kind of intense loyalty, meaning so if you ask for previous purchase, ask for current purchase, meaning are you likely to buy exactly the same brand? What about future purchases? Are you going to budget most of your discretionary income on that you're going to spend on this particular product category for this particular brand, right? So how do you build it? So here's a different take on it. And if you think about a brand value chain, and if you think about different value stages in it, you could think about the fact that as a company, what you have control on is probably your marketing program investment. So what do? You look at creating the best product that you can, you build a communications around it, you solicit the help of trade, and your employees, if there's a service-based brand, you train them enough that basically they become the brand, and they resonate exactly what the brand values are. And in the process, if you think that all the programs across all of these are clear, relevant, distinctive, and consistent, then what you build in the customer's mind who's outside the company is you build awareness, associations, attitude, positive attitude, attachment, and probably word of mouth and other kinds of things that they have activity towards your particular brand. But even when you build it in the customer's mind and in their behavior, then the next step then is their attitudes or what they think about the brand translates to what they perform in the marketplace because of their behavior. That is basically they are willing to pay a price premium. They are inelastic in the price, and because they buy much more of your product, it results in much more market share for you than for your competitors. They are willing to absorb some of the brand extensions that you offer. And you can come up with variants of your product which talk about a lesser cost as the product matures, and the customer still doesn't deviate from their preference for your product, and hence you're able to become more profitable per product and across products as an aggregate. And so let's say the multiplier that you want there in order to translate what is a customer's liking for the product, which is an attitude, to what translates to the marketplace, which is more your market share and your profitability, is you want channel support. You want your third-party suppliers, your value chain to help you deliver value to the customer. You want to be able to attack a demographic that's large enough that if they like the product, it translates to huge market share and huge profitability. And you also want to take care of competitive reactions and form your own niche market, that you're immune to these customer reactions within the customer's mind, right? With the competitors' reactions in the customer's mind. So then you can take the market performance and see how it translates to shareholder value, which is another stakeholder in this business, a part owner of your company. And so then you can think that if in the marketplace you get a high price premium, then it trickles down to higher stock price and so forth. Okay, and there's a different multiplier for that. You can look at the dynamics. You can look at risk profiles based on the industry you are, and so forth. So this tells you a little bit about how you can take what happens within the company and affect different stakeholders, be they customers, be they shareholders. Okay. And so what are the sources? How do you create these, the brand value, if you will? So let's talk about a few things, which is awareness, associations, attitude, attachment, activity, if you want the 5 A's. Okay. So here's one comment, that our brand is so strong that it can be identified by any square inch of any of our ads by a famous US brand. See if you can identify what this is. Any guesses on what this is so far? How about now? You probably got a little bit of it and you have an inkling what this is. This is Marlboro. So what they say is basically if you provide the right 1 inch, you probably will get this brand. So it's obviously true that that all the communications has helped trigger these brand symbols. Why do you need these to be triggered? Because you want to be able to fulfill. So either these trigger needs in you, and because then you go look for that product in order to satisfy a need, or if you already have a need activated, let's say you're thirsty, and this presents itself, immediately you're willing to take it, right? So if I were to ask you to think about what these brands are, you're probably thinking Nike at the moment. You probably have recognized it even before I told that, T-Mobile. I blanked out the name, but you still got it, I guess. Just died. There's nothing that you can't escape this every day, can you? Target, as you walk through, and Apple's as ubiquitous. I can put Windows logos on Apple, and you'd still get Apple. You'd still be able to get it. That's how much brand recognition they've got. And Pepsi, I could put red and blue in different forms, and you'd still make sense to you as Pepsi. So here's something for you to think about. If I tell you about these product categories and ask you to name brands, so let's say oatmeal, just take a second, write down what oatmeal brands you remember. Okay, what comes first to mind? What's second? What's third? What about dog food? Take a sheet of paper, why don't you write this down, right? Or what kind of brands come to mind? How about beer? Now probably thousands come to mind, correct? Or running shoes. Not shoes in particular, right? In general, but running shoes in particular. How about tuna fish? Bananas. Is there other brands in bananas? Are there store brands? Meaning what constitutes a brand in a banana? How about lobsters, peaches? So are some of these commodities where brands don't make sense? Or can you still brand in these kinds of markets? Okay, now that you've written it down, think about which of these brands are more powerful and which product categories are more brand driven than other product categories. So it tells you the power of brand recall. And how did you get these brands? Meaning, is it because of advertising? Did you purchase it? Are you a user of it? Is it because of positive word of mouth by your friends? Is it because of recent press releases? Think about how your brand recall for these brands have happened. So the first is to be able to recognize symbols. Obviously, you're trying to help consumers, even when they're in the low motivation state, when they have less attention to offer, they can still decipher these brand symbols, whether it's a teddy bear, whether it's red and you think Coke or the University of Arizona. When you think about, let's say, blue and you say Pepsi, or you walk in and you see a half-bitten apple and you know it's an iMac that's because of the product form that also tells you what it is. So that's what the brand symbol is. And then you walk into the recall is basically when a need, I don't see any of these symbols around me, but I'm just thirsty. What brands come to mind? How can I fulfill my thirst? Coke comes to mind. And so suddenly I think, I tie a need to a brand, so I recall. So it's a top-down process. A need gets activated and the brand gets associated. Whereas symbols are the opposite. It's a bottom-up process where you're thinking about, oh, I see red, that's Coke. I feel thirsty, correct? And so that's a bottom-up process. Either way, brands are powerful in terms of helping satisfy a need. Here's a third way. Let's think about images. What comes to mind when you think of Mercedes, Benz? So write down 5 words for these. We talked about absolute and Grey Goose before, but what comes to mind? Are you thinking about sophisticated? Are you thinking about white? Are you thinking about a particular peace sign that sits on the Mercedes? Meaning, what goes on? What about Harley Davidson? Are you thinking positive or negative attributes? How about Apple? Listerine. Are you thinking fresh? Or are you thinking small product form? Are you thinking green? Are you thinking about pungent? Are you thinking about earthy? How about Marlboro? How about Calvin Klein? Are you thinking about, I don't know, Marky Mark? What are you thinking about? What do you think about when you think about Calvin Klein? So over a period of time, these brands have hammered through their different kinds of promotion materials, certain associations, and those have been imbibed by you. And now, when you are ready to make a product choice, those associations come to bear. And so that's the biggest thing, because the brand doesn't exist when you're fulfilling the purchase. They don't, maybe today's online context it does, but traditionally advertising would happen in your home, and you'd see all these brands, and then you'd walk into a retail store. Some of these symbols like red, etc., would trigger these again, and then you'd be willing to purchase, right? So it's the advertising is slightly different from when you fulfill a purchase, and maybe even in time. But right now what's happening, you're probably going to a retail store, looking at the product, coming back home, sitting on your computer, and purchasing products. And so where does a brand help is still a question up in the air. But here's one technique at least. Zaltman, for example, they have a metaphor illustration technique where they talk about technique for illustrating the interconnected constructs that influence thought and behavior. If you're interested, you can Google Zaltman. You can find much more about what they talk about. But they usually talk about a guided conversation that they hold with consumers, and they usually get in depth into a few consumers' minds about using storytelling, missing images, etc., to find or vignettes to find what does the brand mean to the person, and then you get to, apart from your associations, you build a slightly bigger picture in terms of what the brand does to the person. Here's Absolute, for example. If you were to take all the stuff that they had, I googled some of the information, and so here's Absolute Freedom. So some of the materials that they put, meaning the various forms, you see the same shapes everywhere, and they encourage consumers to send them these. So Absolute Big, for example, or Zombie, how about that? And that's translated. So some of the materials and the images that they ask these consumers to send these translates to some of the products and the promotion materials they create. How about Absolute Perfection or Absolute Summer, right? This comes up in the ad. And that's not the only promotions that they use. So here's one from Australia, where cricket is much more popular sport than it is here. So it's looking at 3 different other flavors: Absolute Mandarin, Absolute Raspberry, and Absolute Cut. And All Out means something in cricket that would apply to their consumers, but talks about some of the flyers that they saw. How about their displays, in-store displays? The product is kept, and I think it's a perfect example of having a display that communicates about the brand. I think it's cohesive in the communications. And if you walk to a pub or a bar, then the displays are lit with these kinds of similar transparent bottles with colors, color lights, and so forth. So at least hopefully I've communicated that if you think about Absolute or Grey Goose, you would come up with these images, and then through the communication they try and build or reinforce the same, or build on other things that you probably not thought about. Okay, here's one for Grey Goose. So here's one that I picked up when I was driving and I saw this billboard. Seems like when the night comes, indulge yourself, right? So they don't talk about the brand. Hopefully it does it's a symbol that reinforces itself. So that's how you do it, but what's the outcome of equity? So you've built this equity, consumer, right? It's a consumer-based brand equity. So what's the outcome of that? What are you going to get? We talked about price premiums, price elasticity, market share, expansion, success, cost structures, profitability, and so forth. Let me take a few and tell you how we could. Here are a few techniques, brand-based techniques, marketing-based techniques, and valuation methods. So to take brand-based approaches and how you can find out, you want to be able to, it's a moving target, isn't it, measuring a brand. So you want to be able to fix one of those at least, which is that all the inputs, this is how much ad expenditure you have, this is how many consumers you have, these are the few products that we're considering, and so forth. And based on that, you get some consumer responses. And then you use that as an input to how much is the brand valued, right? So here's an example. So you do a blind test that's basically people are just tasting the product without thinking about the brand. And then you probably put a blind test with brand names on it, and then it tells you how much is the brand value communicate to increasing preference for the brand. So for example, Kellogg, we do know that a cereal with and without Kellogg name increases preference by 10 to 50%, right? An old study, I'm just citing an old study. I could be wrong, there could be other studies that exist right now, but gives you at least in some sense an indication that with a brand name on, you start to increase preference. So how about this in terms of price premiumness? So let's say which one, and I ask you a Bayer brand or a generic brand, and there's again an old study, and you ask which one do you prefer, Bayer at $3.75 or a generic brand, your Safeway or any other store, CVS pharmacy that you would get at $3.75, and you say at $3.75, I'm going to choose the Bayer. 25-cent difference, I'm going to choose Bayer. 50-cent difference, I'm going to choose Bayer. 75-cent difference, I'm going to switch to generic brand, which means that the price premium that Bayer can get is about 75 cents at the max, right? Or 70 cents, or slightly less than 75. Here was the study that I was talking to you about, brand X, brand Y, just a taste test. You prefer brand Y, because the name is not mentioned, but once I say X is nothing but Kellogg, it flips, and so you increase 47 to 59%, which means that you increase percentage by 12%, and that's the power of brand. A different technique, and we've talked about conjoint a little bit, it's conjoint analyses, that can be used for brand measurement. And how do you do that? So here's an example. Let's say you come up with different product profiles, and so one product profile is a Dell 320GB, 2GB RAM, 15.4-inch screen, the price about $1,200, not right now, this was about 4 or 5 years back, right now it's probably $120, right? And you ask people, and they tell you that this profile, Apex, rates it and says on 1 to 15 scale, Dell is 9, and B says Dell, that profile is 6, and so forth. Or A and B are the number of people that have chosen it, right? So you can take either one. But it tells you that for all these different profiles, and for this, then you can start to say it's exactly the same profile for certain kinds of things. So why does having an Apple instead of a Dell, how much does it increase preference by? That is, how much is the A's for that difference, or the B's for that difference, right? So consumer A's and consumer B's, and so you could look at let's say these are the ratings that they come up with on 1 to 15 scale, and you can say for consumer A, whenever there was an Apple, to take the average of everything that they told about that particular, irrespective of whatever else was offered, was 5.67, for Dell was 7.33, 160GB was 6.17, 320GB was 6.83, and so forth. And you can say the consumer A rates all Apple products lower than Dell, consumer B rates all Dell lower than Apple, right? And so if you look at the price, the brand equity that's been built by Dell is 7.33 minus 5.67 as compared to Apple for A, 9.5 minus 3.5 for B. And so that gives you an indication of, and then if you did it across 100 people and you would take the averages, you would know how much brand equity one has vis-a-vis another one, right? And so this is the example that I was saying. And if you go to conjoint, if you were to run it through a software, to tell you what's the range in the attribute and what's the percentage important. So in A's case, the brand name is only 14% important, whereas in consumer B's case, the brand name is 50% important, and so none of the others are important. So B is a more brand-led person. So here's one which so an old study in 1994 by Parks and Srinivasan, where they looked at how much price premiumness each of these brands could get and how much market share does that translate to. And so how much market share do they have and how much market share premium did they get because of the brand equity. So Colgate, for example, the price premium they could charge because of the Colgate brand name in 1994, as of 1994, was about 37 cents. And because of the brand name, they got about 12% more instead of that sold it just as a white cube of toothpaste. Okay, and you can look at some of these brands and say, it seems like some of these brands get much more of the brands than others do. Okay. The second approach is just getting marketing-based approaches, and so here what you do is you fix the brand and look at consumer responses for changes in the marketing programs. So you're not fixing the marketing programs and looking at what the consumer looks at, but you're fixing the brand and changing these marketing programs and saying, I'm going to invest so much, I'm going to invest so much, and so forth. And here are some applications of these. And the last one is valuation approaches, where you're trying to find a financial number for the brand equity that you built. Oftentimes used at a larger or a more abstract level than what a consumer does, which is an individual level purchase. Maybe it's for mergers, acquisitions, maybe it's for buying. So Rolls-Royce, for example, how much do you charge for the plant and equipment? How much do you charge for setting up the rights for the brand? Okay, And the various different techniques here, you could use accounting, you could use historical, you could use an external source like Interbrand, or you can use other general approaches that have been approached by others. And some examples of, so you can look at what's the value of the brand relative to its valuable tangible assets. So Rolls-Royce, how much is the value of the brand as compared to the plant that they sold off, and so forth. And those are various ways that you can measure that. So in summary, here's what I have for you, that the sources and the outcomes of these brands still result in this model of brand equity that we talked about. Maybe the sources, in this case, is brand salience, right? So you try to build brand salience, and that results in an outcome where you build some brand awareness. You try to build brand performance and imagery, and that results in some points of parity that the consumer feels and reacts to. You're trying to build some feelings and judgments for the product through your advertising, and that results in some rational emotional decisions. That means that they recommend the product vehemently in brand communities when your product's there. And you can talk about when you're trying to build these programs that help build brand resonance with certain segments of consumers, it builds intense and active loyalty. Hopefully we've covered brand equity to a larger extent than what you have. But feel free to think about, use this model, put it down, and think about the brands that you know and you like, dislike, and see what drives this, what kind of brand performance imagery in your mind is causing that. Okay, thank you, guys.